Huawei to roll out AI chips in second half as potential alternative to Nvidia H20, the report. That is an extremely loaded statement with tons of information behind it. I want to clear up everything that so you can understand it fully. However, my brain is on absolute fire, so I'm probably going to talk fast. So I need you all to listen. Let's just jump in right now. What is going on here? First of all, Huawei's new AI chip is going to be the Ascend 920. We know that's slated for release in second half 2025. Potential alternative to Nvidia H20. The key word there is potential alternative. Also, Nvidia H20 is probably being highlighted because of its relevance in the American mindset and the news right now, with Nvidia having to take a $5 billion write-down last week due to Trump making his export controls even stricter on Nvidia. We'll talk more about that in a second. I want to get back to this potential alternative. The reason I want to bring this up is that I think that this leads people to think, because I've heard this from a few people, that the Huawei, the new series of Huawei that hasn't been released yet, the 920s, are going to be on performance. They're going to be comparable to the Nvidia H20 because this is potential alternative. And that's what you would think when you're looking at something like this. If I'm in America and I'm going to get a computer or a CPU, a GPU or something, and I'm looking at a potential alternative, right? I'm looking at something that's probably like similar specs. But this is not the case here. The 920C is going to outperform the H20 across the board. The reason it's being called a potential alternative is that because of export restrictions on Nvidia, the H20 is the most powerful chip that Nvidia can sell into China. And so we know that Nvidia had $16 billion worth of orders planned to ship to China, which are all now in question, which they have already taken a $5 billion write-down on in order to get into compliance with into whatever compliance might be. Who knows what it is with the Trump administration. Understand that Nvidia had already been shipping these chips to China, as under the old Biden and Trump administration export restrictions, they were deemed okay. They were deemed fine. In fact, they built them specifically to comply with the Biden restrictions on exports. So now they don't. And you might ask why? Well, it could be because of people like this. This is the IFP. This is a group that was founded by two guys, one who you consider, just generic term, very far left, very progressive, and another guy who is a very far right guy. He's actually in a Federalist Society. So you're talking about two individuals who have what would seem to be opposing viewpoints on most things, coming together to work together. Oh, seems great. Except for that they believe, of course, how do you get two people like this to unite? To hold China down, which, as you know on this channel, I don't think is smart. I think it's better when we use the MAGA, make us great again philosophy. A work together, everyone benefits. Okay, so they wrote a letter to the government about these H20 chips. And then on top here, they wrote a note that shortly after this piece was published, and they sent it to the Trump administration, Nvidia disclosed the U.S. government had informed it that export of H20 chips violates supercomputer end-use restrictions, as we claim in this piece. So they're giving themselves a pat on the back. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to this because I just believe this article highlights everything wrong. But first, we're going to go into the performance of these chips. Because again, saying this is a potential alternative is only because of export restrictions. The Huawei chips, in many sense, are already more performant. However, you will see in fluff pieces like this, they're going to highlight the one area where they're not more performant. And they do that as part of their propaganda. And that's what I want to explain. So let's go ahead and get into the performance. Theoretically, and this article was written 18 months ago, theoretically, the H100 is more than 6 times faster than the H20. What is the H100, you might ask? The H100 is the Hopper series from Nvidia. It's second generation technology. We are on Grace Blackwell right now. Whenever you have their new architectures come out from Nvidia, they just list it as L100, Lovelace, H100, Hopper, GB100, Grace Blackwell. And then lately you've had the GB200 and H200, which are just two of the H100 dies and Grace Blackwell dies put together. Okay, and that's like their top of the line model. However, the second generation Hopper technology, in order to comply with Biden's restriction on exports, they reduced the performance on it. So they went down the board and they said, okay, the H100 is banned from China. What can we do with the H20 to get into there? So you can see they have the L20 here based on the Lovelace architecture. And they also had an H800 series. But they took the H20 and they basically reduced everything across the board, almost every single thing. They reduced the memory, they reduced the number of GPUs on it, literally everything. And so theoretically, the H100 is more than 6.68 times as fast. But in terms of LLM reasoning, which we call inferencing, the H20 is more than 20% faster than H100. Now, they point this out in this article. This ended up not being something NVIDIA was specifically targeting. Okay? So theoretically, I'm going to get back to that in a second. Theoretically, the H100 is 6.68 times faster than the H20, according to a recent blog post posted by analyst Dylan Peddle. Even if the H20's actual utilization rate can reach 90%, its performance in the actual multi-card and connection environment is only close to 50% of the H100. What does that mean? That means that when you hook these chips up together, what you're going to do with them, it's only 50% that in the multi-card interconnection scenario of the H100. And you're already at 6.68 times slower across the board for training. But it just so happened, because inferencing at this time was not important when they developed these chips. Inferencing, when you train the chip, that was the important thing. The brute force method of just having compute power. That was important in training these chips. Okay? And that's why they just went forward and they said, okay, brute force means less power. Reduce the GPU, reduce the memory. Real easy things to do. And then NVIDIA was already working on H200 series. They found a little bit of the architecture in there that they could apply backwards to the H20 in order to save cost. Not to make it better, to save cost. Jensen had stated such. And it just turned out that having this architecture increased inferencing, which was not used at the time for training these models. Inferencing is basically after the model is trained, when it talks to a user, a consumer like you and I, it has all of its trained data, and then we ask it questions and it gives us out, it inferences new data. It creates new data based off of its trained data. And so that was not seen as important. Obviously, creating the models was a super important part. That's what the Biden administration and the Trump administration are so worried about. So NVIDIA said, okay, here, we're going to be compliant. We're going to take the H100, which at the time was the best chip. We're going to reduce it across the board in performance. 6 times performance reduction. That's a huge performance reduction. But we're also going to cut costs here. We have this new technique we use on the H200. We can use it here. Hey guys, don't worry. It will not increase its training performance for training the model. Yes, it increased inferencing, but inferencing is just serving users. Okay? 20% better performance than the H100. The reason is that the H20 is similar in some ways to the next generation super AI chip H200 be released next year. Okay, so that was what happened with this chip. It wasn't done on purpose. It wasn't like NVIDIA was purposely trying to circumvent US export law. It was, hey, here's a cost saving measure. This doesn't matter at the time for training models. And then what happened? Well, we had the DeepSeek moment, okay? And DeepSeek came out and it said, hey, we can train these AIs, we can train them much more efficiently. Let's go ahead and train this model with this base amount of like 70 billion, whatever billion amount of parameters. And then we're going to use reinforcement learning by having the model through inferencing create more data for it to be trained on. So it's like a self-referential loop, a self-reinforcing loop, okay? And that was the revolution of DeepSeek that came out, in case you didn't understand, is that all of a sudden they took inferencing from an end user consumer point of view where it really wasn't considered important, and they made it integral to training these models. But understand, they did that just a few months ago. So it wasn't like Nvidia, Google, anybody knew about this. This was the DeepSeek breakthrough you hear about. The Sputnik moment, as some people put it. That was it. Okay? And then I just want to highlight, guess what they did? They released this model through open source, so the entire open source community, that is the entire world, can benefit from it. So you have companies like Meta, Google, even Microsoft a little bit, they contribute a lot to open source. Think about Google, who wrote the paper on, literally wrote the paper on transformers, which powers this entire paradigm. Okay, and they have just wrote the paper on Transformers 2. Sounds like movies, but it's not. Okay, they open sourced it. Everybody benefits. Facebook open source its Llama model. DeepSeek got the Llama model, started building upon it, found this ability to do this inferencing to train it, took this model, open sourced it, released it back. Boy, that sounds like the MAGA philosophy. Make us great again. Work with people we all benefit. Nope. Not to these fascist people whose only goal is keeping other countries down. Read right here. Until recently, inference was not critical for frontier AI development. Now it is, and its importance will likely continue to increase, but export controls have not yet caught up to this fact. So remembering in this hit job, they're trying to list why we must keep China down, and they're patting themselves on the back for influencing the Trump administration. Okay? So think about this. Until recently, inference was not critical for frontier AI development. This is absolutely true. When Nvidia released these chips, it was not important at all for AI development. It was just for serving an end user. Now it is. Well, why is it? It's because of DeepSeek. It's because of a Chinese company. And they've released this information to America to use. And it's important and will likely continue to increase. Okay? So shouldn't we be saying thank you? Hey, yeah, we work together. Things we both benefit. No, what did we say instead? But export controls have not yet caught up to this fact. What? We need to punish them? Does this make sense? We need to punish them? The United States is about to make another strategic mistake, allowing 3 Chinese firms to receive over $16 billion in orders for Nvidia H20 chips, amounting to over 1.3 million chips. The order is over 6 times the size of Colossus, the largest compute cluster in the world. It would more than double China's entire existing stock of H20 chips. If these chips are delivered, they will dramatically increase Chinese firms' ability to develop frontier AI models and deploy them at scale. Look at this. The Bureau of Industry and Security can halt these shipments immediately. But even if it does not, it is likely that these orders are illegal under existing in-use controls because they say it's going to be put in a supercomputer. Okay? This is propaganda. They're just, I don't understand it at all. Okay? Nvidia is potentially losing, okay? So they've written down $5 billion. They're going to try to find a way to be in compliance, et cetera, et cetera. But the way things are going, they have the potential to lose $16 billion in orders. Now, if you're an Nvidia shareholder, right, you might be like, oh, that's nothing. That's not nothing. That's a lot. Okay? That's a lot. It's important to the stock. And now, in your great plan to make America strong again, where are these people going to go? They have to get chips from somewhere. Well, I'm going to tell you where they're going to go. They're going to go right here. They're going to go to Huawei. Okay? Huawei's 910C delivers 60% of Nvidia H100 inference performance. Now, everything is talking about inference. But the simple fact is that the 910C, which is available right now, Huawei has announced that they're shipping their new integrated system to some customers already and be ready for general shipment, general availability in 4 to 6 weeks, which seems absolutely incredible. But I want to make it crystal clear that this chip right here, the only reason we're using keywords here, we're talking about inferencing, we're talking about potential alternatives. Okay, so all you see in these headlines is stuff like this, and you might think, hey, this chip isn't even at that of the H20. This chip exceeds the H20 on every other metric, just like the H100 exceeds the H20 in every other metric, except for inferencing. That is it. And yes, inferencing is important now, but it's not the most important thing. So this is kind of how the media gets. They focus on one thing. Oh, inferencing. We had a DeepSeek moment. Yes, DeepSeek was an incredibly powerful moment. It was absolutely revolutionary. But it doesn't mean that that having more GPUs, having more memory is not important anymore. That's not what it means. You still have to train these models, okay, to begin with, before you can start the inferencing self-referential loop, self-reinforcement loop. I got to stop using referential. That makes it sound like it's conscious. Self-reinforcement loop. Okay, you still have to train the models. So just looking at it and saying brute force power is still important. It's still absolutely important. And Huawei's 910C exceeds the H20 across the board. In fact, when you take this into a system, it on its own is fairly comparable to the H100. It delivers 60% of the H100 performance on inferencing, right? But on the other performance metrics, it's still pretty close. I would say that's actually comparable to the H100. However, Huawei's new system, which I covered in a video last week, they have made huge leaps and bounds in the interconnect. And they stuck more of these 910Cs than you have on the top system from Nvidia right now, NVL72, which has 72 Grace Blackwell 100s on it. They stuck more of their Ascends onto their system, and they are exceeding the performance of the NVL72 in brute force, but not in inferencing. Okay? So the real competitor, these chips can be said to be a threat to Grace Blackwell when it comes to performance. We're not talking about the H20. We're talking about Grace Blackwell. When you get them in their new chipset that just released, which I'm forgetting the name of it, I think it's the 384. It's comparable to the NVL72, the top-of-the-line system that has the throughput of the entire internet, theoretically, from Nvidia. Again, it has 36 GB200s, which would be 72 Grace Blackwell 100s on it. And Huawei is exceeding that in performance. And everything but inferencing. Almost everything, sorry, I shouldn't say everything. But it's very close, even in areas where it's not exceeding it. Now, there is a downside to it, and that's that its power consumption is 2.6 to 4.3 times as much, depending on what you're doing, which is extremely significant. It's going to be much more expensive to run for electricity usage consumption. But in China, I don't think that's as important because electricity consumption is less. Or sorry, the price of it is less. So coming back to this original article, what are we trying to cover here? First of all, understand that the 920C that will be released, going to be based on 6 nanometer node level technology, is going to be in between the H100 and H200 for performance likely. We don't know until it rolls out, but we know that will exceed this generation's chip. So it is going to be the H20 on every single metric across the board, including inferencing. Because right now they're at 50% to inferencing power. And so you would imagine they have at least a 2x in inferencing because now everybody knows how important inferencing is. But let's just say they don't. It's going to be close, at least close to the H20 in inferencing. But every other metric, and don't forget, those other metrics are still very, very important. It will exceed the H20. It will likely exceed the H100 even. Okay. They say here it's a potential alternative because the only thing you can buy in China, or could buy, now can't buy it now, but you could buy, were the H20s. Okay, so that's why it's saying like that. I don't want you to come into my comments and say, oh, these chips are so far behind. They're just competitors to the H20. No, they're only a competitor to H20 because of export restrictions. That's the only reason. So hopefully this all makes sense. Hopefully I cleared this up. 21 minutes, that's a long time. I talked for a long time. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys though. Please let me know in the comments down below how I did on this. I was trying to get this out. I see these headlines and they really bug me. And now, wait, I got one more thing to say too. It's not roses for everybody in China either, okay? So it's not roses for Nvidia, which is losing $16 billion worth of orders, but it's not gonna be roses for everybody in China, okay? Because Huawei, there's no way they have all these chips available. We know that because even though they have done very well in lithography, America has forced them to catch up. They're still on deep UV. They're not on EUV. Deep is DUV and EUV is extreme. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that their production yields are not going to be where they should be in order to ship the chips that are needed to meet their demand, okay? And we know this because TSMC is being fined by the U.S. government. Just think about this. The U.S. government is going to fine a foreign company. What? TSMC is likely going to be fined by the U.S. government for allowing these backdoor channel sales, even though how would they ever prevent it, to some Chinese firms. And the reason that these silicone wafers are being sold or are being rerouted over to China is because there's no way that China has the yield yet. As I mentioned on this channel, ASML is another foreign company is being prevented by who? The U.S. government from working with China in full capacity. And so we know that China at best has DUV, which means that like Samsung struggled for years with their foundry, with their Xenos chips, and just it wasn't until this year, I think, that they actually re-released them in the Galaxy series. That likely, unless Huawei has pulled another miracle behind the scenes, likely they're going to be struggling on their production yields. And yes, they're probably going to be shipping chips, which is amazing on this new system, how quick they're getting it out. But they're not going to have enough to meet the demand left there for the Nvidia H20. Okay. So everybody is struggling, and it's all because what? What? Why? When we could work together and everybody could improve at the same time. I don't know. Maybe I'm the insane one here. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm on the quest to 900. Please hit that like and subscribe button down below. We really need it. Thank you and take care.